rights. This is Black History Month, and we want to focus on what civil rights means to us individually, to our community. I'm pleased to have as a guest today Phyllis Rawls Goff. We're talking about her story, her family story, her business story, her professional story, and our contemplation of what role civil rights would have played in our lives and what roles we play in moving the notion of civil and human rights forward. I want to begin, though, by thanking Comcast. This program is brought to you by Comcast of the Twin Cities. We thank them for their support. Phyllis's bio includes that she has served as a community volunteer with several nonprofit organizations in the Twin Cities area, including Minnesota Historical Society, the McKnight Foundation, and the St. Paul YWCA. Prior to her retirement, Phyllis worked as an executive in the industries of telecommunications, of higher education, administration of philanthropy. Her career included handling government relations, community affairs, and customer service at U.S. West, Quest, and now the CenturyLink, and she served as the chief of staff to the president of Hamline University. She was interim chief of staff at the St. Paul Foundation and at Minnesota Community Foundation. She currently resides in St. Paul and enjoys spending time with her grandchildren, volunteer work, and promoting St. Paul. Phyllis, thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Let me say, I know you and perceive you as the quintessential public executive. To me, you exemplify what it means to stand for and to model public accountability, public efficiency, public professionalism, and you bring what I would call an A game to everything that you do. All the times I've seen you doing things, they've been absolutely immaculate, well organized, and well executed, and flawless. So that's my impression of you.
Well, it's a good impression. I'm not sure it's a true impression, but it's thank you.
Well, I think the world sees you that way, but let's begin by talking about your background. And when Al McFarlane asked you, what does civil rights mean to you, what's your first thought?
So I believe that the civil rights movement and everything that it meant, but that combined with a loving, supportive, and protective family and extended community has made me who I am today, and has helped me to develop both personally and educationally, and thus professionally. And so I owe the civil rights movement to where I am today and what I've achieved today. I recall, like, back in the 1980s, during Black History Month, I was on a panel with Matt Little. Mm-hmm. And the question came up about, do you think Martin Luther King Jr. had an impact on your life? Mm-hmm. And I quickly said, I do believe that Martin Luther King, I think he really did have an impact on my life and the success that I have today. And Matt Little looked at me and says, no, you know he had an impact on your life, and I have to agree with that.
Not a question if I think anymore.
Right.
It's just true. Yeah. And so the civil rights movement for you, more than an abstraction, is something that you've lived with and lived through. What, in your growing up, sort of speaks to the challenges that we've experienced as African people, African Americans, and that is a consequence or influenced by the movement itself? What stories are in your family that say to you and the world, yes, civil rights important?
So everything about my upbringing has an impact, or had an impact, on the work of the civil rights movement. And mm-hmm. I say that because I was born and raised in the segregated South. Mm-hmm. I was one of 9 children in a house of 2 parents, my mother and my father. Mm-hmm. And my maternal grandmother, who lived with us, who always lived with us and helped raise us. And we lived in an environment where inequities, discrimination was just a fact of life. Mm-hmm. And I think I grew up with this sense that it's wrong, it's unfair, but it is what it is. It's a fact of life.
And so describe the inequities you're talking about. What were you aware of? And when did you become aware of this inequity? And I say that because I know that our families shielded us, because most of us have childhood memories that are wonderful, and we are nurtured by loving, sisters and brothers and parents and grandparents. But at some point in time, we face the things that reveal the reality of our situation. So what's your story in that regard?
So my story is that I agree with you, Al. I grew up in a cocoon where my family protected all of us. And my neighborhood, my community protected all of us because we were in a segregated community. And so in that respect, it was a very loving and caring, supportive, and again, protective upbringing. But my earliest memory of the inequity is that I distinctly remember the annual Christmas holiday parades, and when the Santa Claus float would come by, they would throw candy to the white children, but they wouldn't throw candy to us. And it got to be a joke. We knew that we should never expect that Santa Claus was going to throw candy to us. And I remember as a child going to the movie theater. There was only one movie theater in town, and the upstairs were for blacks and the downstairs were for whites, and that was a fact of life. And I think maybe I was 5 when my older siblings took me there, and we needed to go downstairs to the concession stand, and I saw a water fountain. I thought, well, I'm thirsty.
Oh no.
And my older sister grabbed me and says, that water fountain's not for you, that if you want water, we have to buy a cup of water. So, and there were segregated water fountains all around town, and there were segregated
Where was home?
Brownsville, Tennessee, which is about 60 miles east, north of Memphis.
Okay.
So in West Tennessee. Yeah. So that was just a fact of life.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane. We're doing our Black History Month series of interviews. My guest is Phyllis Goff. She is what I'm calling a public executive, a professional par excellence, a human being par excellence, actually. And so glad that you're here. If you like this conversation, I invite you to like us on Facebook. This is Facebook Live, to share this program, and also to subscribe. We want to grow these conversations, and your participation, your involvement is critical. It's important, and we're having a lot of fun. We think it's important to have conversations like this, relaxed, but speaking to the truth of our history. Phyllis, you can't see it right now, but on the wall behind this lights is a photograph of a woman who was my great-grandmother. She was a slave. I knew her. I have photographs of me and her. That's how old I am, right? I'm 5, and she probably is 95 at the time. She died some years later. But I discovered after I went to see 12 Years a Slave, I came home, and the photograph on my mantle is a photograph that has me and my cousins, all 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 years old, then the adult sitting on the divan or the couch, and she's sitting with her daughter, my grandmother, who's sitting with her daughters, my aunt and my mom and some other family members. But I realized then that this woman had been a slave, that I knew her. She spoke to me, and I had visited her in Mississippi and had the experience of being disciplined by her when I stuck my hand into a barrel of cotton, fluffy, white, pretty cotton, and she whacked my hand with a stick saying, "Don't put your hand in there because you never know what's in that barrel." So that's an indelible impression that my great-grandmother made of me. But the most important thing is that I am connected to slavery through her, and it's personal for me. What about your family?
So I did not know my great-grandfather, but I do know, and I didn't know this as a child growing up because we never talked about slavery growing up. I'd have to say that my parents, my grandmother and my community wanted so much for us to look forward and look ahead that in many ways not talking about the slavery of the past was something that was lost that I wished we had talked more about. So my father's grandfather, who, like you, was my great-grandfather, was born a slave. And the stories that and you have to also know this, Al. My father was born in 1896. So my father didn't get married until he was in his 40s. And my mother was much younger. And so, and in fact, my father was more closer to my grandmother's age
Sure, yeah.
than my mother's age. So it's easy to see that, okay, so his father's father was born of slavery.
Sure.
And the stories that I know now, because my mother really got into genealogy, and my mother actually went to a couple of Alex Haley conferences because he was from West Tennessee. And so he did several genealogy conferences down there. And so my mother really got into it. And as a result of that, she learned through working with other genealogists and doing some research herself that my great-grandfather was Dan Rawls, and that he was born a slave, and that he was owned by a Dr. Rawls, and that Dr. Rawls had a daughter, and when she got married, he gave her a slave as a wedding gift, and that wedding gift was my great-grandfather.
Wow.
So those, and the way we're able to tell that also, or to know that, is because there was a white woman down in Texas who was doing genealogy at the same time as my mother was. And she was doing genealogy on her white family side and found these slave records of property ownership. And then this name Rawls kept coming up in terms of slaves, so she knew that there were some black Rawlses in Tennessee that were connected to her, and so that's how we got more information about the slave records.
Isn't that amazing?
Yes.
Isn't it amazing?
Yes, yeah.
And so what does it do? How does that inform you now? I'm imagining, Phyllis, that just being conscious and aware of the strength and the resilience and the survivorship of our people sort of carries forth in you somewhere, in your spirit, your attitude, your approach to the world. Are you conscious of this history that you are part of, or not? I don't know.
So I'm conscious of this history, and even more so recently, and probably because of all of the programs that are out during Black History Month, which they also call Black Employment Month, jokingly, about how a lot of the discriminatory practices from slavery transferred over into Jim Crow laws, and that they were respected laws of on the books, and therefore a lot of the inequities that we still exist with today are from those Jim Crow laws, and that unless we come to terms with the fact of that, and unless we come to the terms with our history and how our history is still extended into some of the inequitable practices of today, we're never going to get to where we need to, where we have a diverse world that respects people of all kinds, that respects differences, that values differences, and uses that to make us an inclusive society where everybody can reach their potential. So I'm very much aware, as I get older, how important it is to tell my story, because without telling my story, people don't know my past, and people don't know and understand those who have come before me, who sacrificed so much, who gave of their lives, who to make us where we are today. So, no, it means a lot to me, and it weighs on me also. But it also gives me hope, because I feel like that information can help all of us to rise to a better place.
What do you see as our future and our destiny? One of the things I know about you is that you, we've mentioned it in the opening, you're involved in public service work, institutions in the community, foundations. And I see you as a person that has worked to build quality relationships, quality outcomes in institutions that serve our community, and serve the community at large as well.
It helps us all.
Yeah, so how important is that work, and how important is this whole notion of being a public executive, even when it applies to things like sororities and fraternities and church organizations and philanthropic organizations and universities? What's the key from your point of view of bringing and delivering excellence as a strategy for the continued evolution and improvement of our people?
Okay, I'm going to add in arts organizations too, because I've done a lot of volunteer work in the past and still do for Penumbra Theater.
Great organization.
And I believe that organizations like that help to build bridges. And building bridges help to build greater understanding. And that is all about relationship building and building trust so that people aren't afraid of what they don't know. And they also can be corrected on what they do know that's incorrect. So, and I feel like my role as you call it, a public servant, helps to build that bridge between the business community, between the philanthropic community, between my involvement and volunteerism with community organizations and arts organizations. And I'd like to think of myself as a connector that helps people be able to connect and to be comfortable connecting so that they can better understand where each comes from and can value and respect that and make for a better world for all of us and for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. And that's another thing that I'm hopeful for. I'm hopeful for kids of the future will be more naturally inclusive. They will be more understanding of valuing difference and understanding how that makes them a better person and makes how they learn and how they work and how they contribute to the community, makes it a better place for them and their families and for all families.
Is the challenge on our side of the equation, or is it in the public at large, or is it equally shared? I'm arguing, Phyllis, that the inclination of black people is to be open, that our approach to life and community and society is inclusive by definition, and that is what is being challenged by a history and a process of exclusion. And so the battleground is whether inclusion as a philosophy, a practice, a strategy will emerge and prevail. I think that's the language in corporations today, in government, diversity and inclusion. So is there resistance to the idea of inclusion from within our community on our side of the fence, or is that resistance something that's outside of us that we're fighting together against? Do we have allies on both sides? How do you see it?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I feel that the biggest hurdle is as the now majority community looks at what they'd like to see, what they'd like to see of the world going forward, that there's this value of inclusion, the rising tide, the tide rises all boats.
All boats, yeah.
I'll get it one day. But, and that's one of the things that I think we are challenged by in the philanthropic community, is that what programs can we support? What partnerships can we help build to make all races feel that there's value for all of us in being diverse, equitable, and inclusive?
Great. My phone just went off on my watch, excuse me.
Okay.
So I think you're absolutely correct. And so as you move forward into both your retirement but also increased civic work, what lessons do you take, and how do you intend to sort of continue to preach, if you will, and to demonstrate by your work the value that you're talking about?
So my desired hope is to continue learning, because I don't think you can get enough learning. And I think that I might think I know enough about, and I don't know enough about my own community. And I certainly don't know enough about other communities. And the more I know about all of the diverse communities that we represent collectively, the better it will be for me personally, and the better it will be for me to be a better citizen of the community. I also believe that my charge, Al, is to encourage others to continue being curious and to continue learning.
Phyllis, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
I'm Al McFarlane. This is Conversations with Al McFarlane from the Marcus Garvey House in North Minneapolis, part of our series this week and last week on civil rights. And I want to thank our sponsor for making this happen. And if you want to experience interviews with civil rights leaders from Minnesota and across the country, visit Comcast's Voices of the Civil Rights Movement platform. It's available for free at civrightsvoices.com, civrightsvoices.com. Join me again tomorrow when I bring another stellar leader in our community to talk about what civil rights means to us. Thank you so much. Remember, like this program, share it, follow us, let people know that we're having this conversation. Thank you so much.